Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Thursday, October 9th, day 734 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our U.S. Bureau Chief, Jacob Magid. Jacob, thank you so much for joining me on this truly monumental day.
Historic, right?
Historic for sure, as U.S. President Donald Trump announced overnight that Israel and Hamas have signed off on the first phase of his plan to secure the release of all hostages and end the Gaza war. This comes 2 years and a day after the fighting was sparked by Hamas's October 7th, 2023 massacre of 1,200 in southern Israel, with another 250 taken hostage to Gaza. Speculation, of course, was mounting that the announcement was coming after photographers managed to snap photos of a note that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio passed to Trump during a White House meeting. Trump later took to his Truth Social platform announcing this means that all of the hostages will be released very soon and Israel will withdraw its troops to an agreed-upon line as the first steps toward a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. So it is very early in Israel and very late in the U.S., and details are still solidifying. So Jacob will discuss all that we know now after the break. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our U.S. Bureau Chief, Jacob Magid. Trump's announcement of the agreements to the first phase of the deal to end the war and release the hostages set off a flood of emotion early Thursday morning in Tel Aviv among freed captives, their families, and basically all of Israel. Some of the families and former captives gathered at the Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where mass weekly rallies have been calling for their return, as they cheered the news and chanted Nobel Prize to Trump while vowing to continue demonstrating until the slain hostages in the Gaza Strip are brought back to Israel. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Israelis have joined them by now. In Gaza, Gazans are cheering the news of the deal, even as the IDF's Arabic language spokesperson addressed residents, cautioning them that the area north of Wadi Gaza, the northern part of the Strip, is still defined as a combat zone. Jacob, this is your third appearance on the Daily Briefing this week, maybe a record for you. And I just want to thank you, first of all, for helping us make sense of the lead up to the deal. So now let's make sense of what happened in the final day of negotiations for the first phase. And we saw all the big guns arrive. So who were the bulldozers that pushed this deal to completion?
Well, I think ultimately it was Donald Trump. He's the main bulldozer here, but there were other players that were actually on the ground, and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, the intelligence chiefs for Turkey and for Egypt, the Qatari Prime Minister, Ron Dermer was there, the Khalil Haya, the chief negotiator for Hamas. So anyone who was anyone made it to Sharm for this historic final day of meetings. On Monday and Tuesday, you had the technical talks, but Wednesday came time for the real brass tacks and getting what I think, speaking to two Arab diplomats, one involved and another familiar with and briefed with these negotiations, who said that the final day really focused on guarantees and assuring Hamas that the U.S. and the other guarantors, be it Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, but also just the broader, I guess, region, was willing to do whatever they could to make sure that this war ends if Hamas is willing to give up all of its leverage up front, which is something that it had not been willing to do until now. And my understanding is if you look at the difference between this round and all these other times that we've had these somewhat cyclical conversations, actually, one of the key main differences was Turkey being there. The addition of this third mediator leaning on Hamas very hard with assurances from the U.S. I think Turkey, specifically President Erdogan, has a very good relationship with Trump and I think wants a lot from Trump, be it from F-35s to a potentially civil nuclear program or other major goodies that Turkey is looking to secure from the U.S. And I think what they needed to do in order to maybe advance those goals is to deliver Hamas here. And that was clearly, they were instrumental in doing so. Obviously, Qatar has a lot of influence over Hamas, but given that that Turkey is this NATO power that has a substantial military, is a real global power in many ways, that I think that was maybe arguably the biggest difference maker here. Of course, there's reasons from Trump down, but that's one unique aspect here that was different from other rounds.
And I just want to specify that the leverage that you're referring to is, of course, the hostages. Let's make that clear, that Hamas views their leverage. This is the hostages, people. And about Turkey, of course, it's very clear that they back Hamas. And so one would think that that also allowed Hamas to trust Turkey a little bit more than perhaps Egypt, which has close connections with Israel in terms of security, at least, and definitely has its own agenda in keeping the Gazans in Gaza.
Yeah, I think each of these mediators had an important role to play. Egypt is just like a practical one, given that they share a border, as you mentioned, and that Hamas or any power in Gaza will need to have some working relationship with their Arab neighbors to the south. And then Qatar as well, given it's more of, I guess you could say, an ideological backer, or it also a financial backer in the past, whereas Turkey, again, is just more of a world superpower that's also able to bring the U.S. in a way that it seems like Qatar, even despite that Qatar has been able to secure this very impressive, I guess you could say, executive order from Trump that security guarantees that no other country in the region has. But still, I think Turkey in many ways is another level above that. And the fact that they are now involved, I think it's something that makes Israel very nervous, given the way that even in the past 24 hours, Turkey, I think Erdogan said that at this point Netanyahu has surpassed Hitler and is very critical of what he calls Israel's genocide in Gaza. It will be interesting to see whether or not this is the start possibly of, again, a warming in ties. But obviously, if you look at the rhetoric, that's not necessarily suggesting it. But clearly, that these three countries played a crucial role. And obviously, most importantly, was Trump was getting all these countries on board. And he talks about that in his interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News, which is that one of the main points he makes up front is just that this wouldn't have been able to happen if we didn't have all of the region supporting this plan and leaning on Hamas at the same time.
Now, you mentioned Qatar's executive order that gives it security. What is the play out of the guarantees for Hamas or for Gaza in general? Are there any written guarantees for Israel not restarting the war, or is this a gentleman's promise at this point?
It's a good question. We're early right after this is all Stein still, and it's at this point it's early morning by you, and I guess those who were up all night are probably maybe trying to get some sleep, maybe not. My understanding is that it's not going to be in writing. That this is going to. I think that's the issue, and why. The way that I think the U.S. is able to keep Israel on board is by not putting this in writing. And I think if you looked at, I think there were comments made by Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, who was a lot less vague about whether or not the war was actually over. He was, again, saying kind of the lines that you hear Netanyahu say, which is that it's all performance-based, and we'll have to see how this first round of this first phase goes and plays out. And if Hamas releases all the hostages, I'm sure there will be a lot of pressure on Netanyahu if the bodies of all 28, at most, I guess you could say, of hostages are not released. There's roughly 20 that we believe are alive. And if those, Hamas has said in the past that they don't know where all of them are buried. Some of them might be in areas that Israel is actually in control over, so they need more time. My understanding is that they're actually going to start with releasing the living hostages, and then from there, once the ceasefire is fully in place, they'll be able to maybe reach other places to get bodies, but it might take time. And if they don't, what will be the Israeli response? I'm sure there'll be a lot of pressure for Israel to maintain the deal from outside Israel, and I'm sure from inside Israel, from the coalition, that will be, I think, a lever that maybe the far right will use to encourage Netanyahu to resume fighting. So those will be things that we'll have to see in the coming days. But right now, the talk is this agreement is specifically about the hostages and an initial Israeli withdrawal. To what my understanding, speaking to the Arab diplomat a few hours ago, it's about 53% of the Gaza Strip, so a little bit, like a few percentage points less than it was a couple days ago. But now the issues of things like disarmament and post-war management of Gaza, those things are going to have to be negotiated in subsequent rounds.
Now, in terms of the rollout, as I understand it, it's first the living hostages, and then the dead hostages and then the Palestinian security prisoners, which are held in Israel. Is that correct? And do you know the days that this is meant to happen?
So my understanding, I've heard different things from different sources. So take it with a grain of salt. I do believe there might be some coinciding with the bodies and some of the prisoners who are released. That there might not have to be a decision to wait until all the bodies are released for Israel to begin releasing prisoners. Especially, I think, after it's getting numbers in terms of the conditions and where people are. I think Hamas is supposed to give more information. As for when these releases will take place, so President Trump has said a couple times that it will be on Monday, that he even, there was a recording of his call with a group of hostage families who are in Washington right now, and he says to them, the hostages are going to be all returning on Monday. That is on the record, and the President of the United States saying that. At times, though, President Trump has not been a man for details and has gotten the numbers of hostages wrong countless times. And the reason I mention that is because I've also been told by Arab diplomats that we're actually looking as soon as Saturday, more likely on Sunday. If you think about it, though, what the question is about, if it's according to the 20-point plan, which they've kind of massaged some of the details since then, but the 20-point plan that Trump published, the White House published last week, talked about 72 hours from the announcement of the deal. So is the announcement now? My understanding is likely the announcement would technically be considered from when the cabinet approves it. The cabinet in Israel is not supposed to actually meet and vote on this until around 3 p.m. on Thursday, if the Israeli official I spoke with is accurate, meaning 72 hours from then. So that would bring us to, theoretically, Sunday at the earliest, that we could start seeing hostages released. I think, again, some of these details are going to be finalized in the coming days. And coming hours as well. And the reason something is noteworthy is that even when I was able to confirm this announcement was going to be taking place, there's actually, one of the sources told me that some of the formalities, is what he called it, of this deal actually have not been finalized, but the main issues are done with this part. So I guess there will be questions about maybe the exact timing that still need to be decided. And as for which Palestinian prisoners will be released, I think that's also something that I haven't been able to confirm yet. What I was told in the past, over the past 24 hours, is that it would be something that would be decided in the final minutes before the deal was reached in order to ensure that it wouldn't become something dragged out. But there hasn't been a lot of talk about which Palestinian prisoners will be released. I'm sure Israel also, as in past rounds, will want to wait till as late as possible because it's something that's not going to be very popular. I'm sure there's certain people that they managed to keep off the list of 250 life sentence prisoners, but others that are going to be very difficult for the Israeli public to swallow. I spoke with one Palestinian source who said that Hamas had relayed to interlocutors that it was committed to releasing Marwan Barghouti. Marwan Barghouti is a former senior Fatah official who headed the Fatah in the West Bank, and is also convicted and sentenced to 5 life sentences for helping plan attacks during the Second Intifada that led to the deaths of 5 civilians. He denies some of the charges and presented different papers in prison talking about how he supports a 2-state solution and is seen as this potential Palestinian leader, replacement of Mahmoud Abbas, because he's got this broad appeal. But obviously to Israelis, he's seen as an arch-terrorist and someone that would be very difficult for Netanyahu to release. But I was told that the Israelis prioritized, in terms of its veto, releasing the Nukhba fighters, those who actually took part in the October 7th attacks, and showed a little bit more flexibility in terms of the life sentence prisoners, many of them who are much older and therefore seen as maybe theoretically less of a threat. But obviously these are very difficult decisions to be making. And we're done, I think, at the last minute. And we'll have to find out in the coming hours and days of who exactly will be released in exchange for those 48 hostages.
Okay, let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our U.S. Bureau Chief, Jacob Magid. So, Jacob, there are rumors that there were actually direct negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh. Were the Israeli and Hamas teams in the very same room at the end? Because there are some pictures that tend to make us think that this is what happened.
Yeah, I think the rumors are sparked by some of the footage that I saw as well, where if you look closely, there's one pan shot where the camera goes across the room and you see Israeli officials and you see Qatari officials and you see US officials and you see Egyptian officials and you see Turkish officials. And then there's a quick blip in the camera and then all of a sudden you see another pan of Hamas officials and Qatari officials. And if you don't look very quickly enough, you might assume it's all in the same room. But I think, and I spoke with one Qatari official who said they were not in the same room, at least the footage that I asked him about. He said, no, those were two separate clips. Is it possible that other points during the past 24 hours or in the other parts of the negotiations they were? Sure. But I think, at least from my understanding of the footage that is being referenced a lot, this was not taking place in the same room. But still, this footage has not come out before of us seeing what's actually going on in some of these negotiations. And to see very surreal footage of the Prime Minister of Qatar shaking hands warmly with Nitzan Alon, who's the IDF's hostage point man, that is not scene you often see on covering this stuff for the past 2 years. And I guess it's just testament to where we are in this real historic moment where it has the ability of bringing these sides together, I think, in their joy. Obviously, though, I think with the joy in terms of Israel and Hamas is happening in separate rooms.
Okay, but is it possible? We are reporting that there's going to be some kind of official signing of the deal today, midday, later in the day, today at least. And is it possible that there's going to be some, photo op then as well, where Hamas and Israel could be in the same room?
I think not. I think that Israel will be pretty adamant, and I think also Hamas as well, that they'll want to keep this separate. I do think there are times where it's actually the U.S. that might have wanted something of that nature to demonstrate the peacemaking abilities as Donald Trump is trying to secure this Nobel Peace Prize. But I think given the history of this conflict and what Hamas is all about, I don't see some sort of handshake moment coming in the next day when this deal is signed.
But there will be no lack of photo ops if indeed U.S. President Donald Trump does hit the region. And yesterday or the day before, he was invited by Egypt to have some kind of ceremony there if the peace deal is signed. But it kind of sounds right now that he's thinking of coming to Israel, at least in addition, instead. I don't know. What's going on here?
Yeah, so earlier in the day before it was announced, Trump said that he would likely go to Egypt. That would be the place he would stop in. He was asked about Gaza specifically, which would be pretty wild. And he said, yeah, maybe I'll do that too. But I don't think he was putting a lot of thought into that. But he said he was going to be making the rounds. And then after the announcement was made, he had a phone interview with Axios, Channel 12, depending on English or Hebrew, and he said that Netanyahu invited him to speak at the Knesset, and that's something he'd be happy to do. I would be very interested in finding out when that speech would be if he decides to give it, especially if theoretically he talked about before the deal was signed coming on Saturday or Sunday. So meaning theoretically arriving before the hostages are released at a very sensitive time, and where every word that comes out of his mouth will be incredibly scrutinized. So therefore, I would have a hard time seeing a speech at the Knesset before the hostages are released. If there is some sort of speech, I would imagine it would be more practical for it to happen afterwards. But that would mean he's going to be in the region for several days. But I assume he does want to take a bit of a victory lap, as well deserved.
And of course, Israel is in the midst of the Jewish holidays, and we'll see who will be able to turn up at the Knesset if Trump indeed delivers a speech on one of the Jewish holidays or on the Sabbath. I'm not sure what the rabbis would say about that. Perhaps some of our listeners can let us know in an email. So, Jacob, at this point, everyone is euphoric, shall we say, but I just wonder and worry, it's not over till it's over. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on what could actually still tank the deal at this point.
Nothing comes to mind specifically about tanking the deal, but I do think, not that that's not out of the realm of possibility, but one of the things that I was thinking about over the past few hours is that we don't know the exact number of living hostages who will be released. And therefore, like the goal is to have 20, but I think the various officials I've spoken with have been kind of careful to get into very specifics because it could be 19 and it could be 18 and hopefully it is 20. But obviously, just like other releases, not everything is going to go perfectly. I spoke with an Israeli official who said there won't be these very disgusting ceremonies that we saw in the previous releases in January. That's something that Hamas has agreed not to do. But the combination of not knowing the exact number of living hostages and also whether Hamas will be able to retrieve all of the remaining slain hostages, I think that's going to add a tint of, I guess,
uncertainty at the very least.
Uncertainty at the very least, and to this whole experience. But given that this is something that the country has been waiting for so long, I think the emotions right now are rightfully euphoric.
And just one final comment. Of course, we're talking about Hamas, but it's not only Hamas that holds the hostages, living and dead. And we saw yesterday that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other factions also headed to Sharm el-Sheikh. I assume, knowing the outcome so far, that they were on board, though initially reluctant to sign on to the deal. And one just needs to wonder if they're going to play ball with the hostage releases as well.
I think that's a good point. And there's one concern that an Israeli official I spoke with talked about is that if this deal doesn't have enough support, you could see a splintering off of some of these groups that are either holding weapons that don't want to give them up or hostages that don't want to give them up. I think the hostages situation is a little bit less likely. Islamic Jihad, who's holding Ram Baslavsky and possibly other hostages, I think is known to is expected to follow Hamas's lead on this. But you're right. There are a lot of different cooks in this kitchen that need to get on board. And I think we need to go into this with clear-eyed and with cautious optimism at this point, as opposed to cautious pessimism, which has been something that we've had to the main, I guess you could say, emotion for the past 2 years. I think that shift is very welcome.
It is, and I think everyone who is rejoicing in the streets right now is also waiting for the other shoe to drop to see the state of our hostages. And it was so sickening to see who came out, in what state they came out in the winter releases. And all of us are really, really girding emotional capacity in order to see what's going to happen. So, Jacob, so much uncertainty, so many unknowns, and I appreciate the update now. And listeners, please check out our live blog, which will be updating throughout the day and night as this unfolds. So, Jacob, yet again, thank you for your third time was the charm, your third appearance on the Daily Briefing this week.
I'll come on 3 times a week every week if this can be the reason. So thank you, Amanda.
All right, sold. Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another episode tomorrow. This episode was produced by Adina Karpuch. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.